Today we're going to be looking at that of Babel. Babel in chapter 11. And there are numerous reasons for looking at Babel. Here just this month, I had two individuals who talked to me, and the conversation somehow steered to Babel. And in some of the things that I said concerning Babel, they looked at me very strange, as in one of them who said, "What book have you been reading?" And I said, "Well, Genesis chapter 11, because clearly it states it there." And I'm not sure that either of these hadn't learned of Genesis 11, read it, but maybe other things have crept in, or maybe they just hadn't given it a whole lot of consideration as to what is here, because what is taught concerning this event of Genesis 11 is more than just where we got the languages. It's more than that. It's more than just an explanation, oh, and this is where we got the languages, because that's just a part of it. There are more things to consider in this, and really, as far as this lesson is concerned, there's nothing on it concerning the languages, except that this is what God did to stop what they were about to do. But we're going to discuss what they were doing. And here we are in concerning Babel, but let's begin in Psalm 66:5. Come and see the works of God. He is awesome in His doing toward the sons of men. This is going to be seen in numerous ways throughout the history of mankind. And Babel is just one of them. One of many. Matter of fact, what had just occurred a couple of generations prior to Babel was also the works of God, of where He, in fact, flooded the entire earth, destroying the wicked. But Babel is in Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9. It's only these 9 verses, and that's it. But there's a lot to it that's in there that's telling us of the ancient world this side of the flood. Now, we've got to get to Genesis chapter 5 and before that to know of, in Genesis 6, of that of life prior to the flood. And that is the ancient world. You don't get more ancient than that which was on the other side of the flood. But Genesis 11, beginning in verse 1, is the account of Babel. This is the post-flood world, and we are 2 generations after the flood. How do I know that? Because all we have to do, Genesis has genealogies in there. And it tells us, one after other, Adam to Seth, Seth to his son, Lamech to Methuselah, to Lamech to Noah. We know these generations, and it's easy to number them. And this, what happens at Babel, is just 2 generations past the flood. But that's not to say that it is the beginning of that second generation after the flood. I'm not saying that, because it could be quite a number of years in that second generation that this occurs. But I want us to look at this. Genesis chapter 8, and we're going to, now at the moment this may seem more like a lecture than a sermon. We're going to get to things that are more similar to a sermon in just a minute. But Genesis chapter 8, the flood is over. And in Genesis chapter 8, in verse 17, he tells that of Noah and his family. You have the 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, and of course Noah's wife. And there's a command, be fruitful and multiply on the earth. That's 8:17. He tells them that. This is the ark has come to rest in the mountains of Ararat. The Bible does not say it came to rest on the mountain of Ararat. It doesn't say that. It says it came down in the mountains of Ararat. And why do I make that distinction? Because I heard someone want to say that the Quran was more accurate than the Bible in this. And that for whatever reason, it doesn't matter, whatever the Bible says is going to be accurate regardless of anybody else. But the flood is already, also in 8:22, there's a promise concerning the earth, a promise that is made there, that there will always be a seed time and harvest. There'll always be a winter and a summer. All these things are going to continue on the earth, and it's going to be steadfast. It will always continue, and of course until the end of the world itself. All these things are going to continue, and it's not going to be a slow teetering out. It's going to be a sudden appearance of Christ as judge, and that's when this world is over. But in 8:22, we have a promise concerning the earth. In Genesis chapter 9, we have the events after the ark. One of those is that a pronouncement of the death penalty for murder. That there's capital punishment for murder. And while Cain did murder Abel in Genesis chapter 4, it was God's prerogative as judge to decide whether Cain was going to live or die. It's the judge's prerogative. And God said that Cain would live. Okay, it is the judge's judgment if that's what he wants to do. But capital punishment in Genesis chapter 8, and we have there a principle that is set, and it's set for all time because we're made in the image of God. And it's because we're made in the image of God that we are protected. That we can I ran over a squirrel here a few weeks ago, all right? And I really didn't think much of it. There may be some animal people that think it's very harsh, but a squirrel, as cute as they are, as destructive as they are, they have no soul. They're not in the image of God. And it's not murder to kill a squirrel or to kill some other animal. It's not murder. And there's not a death penalty for that. But there is a protection for human life, protection for all human life, and we do not get the right to decide who is human and who is not. Because as soon as we give that right, as soon as you allow some person to get that right, to allow them the privilege of saying who is human and who is not, things are going to get pretty nasty. Because they get to reassign as they will. Right now, you have since 1973, the Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decided that to legalize abortion, and if they can decide that an unborn child is not a human, then they also have the ability to decide any of us are not human. Anybody. It doesn't just stay with the unborn. The unborn are protected just like the born are protected. We're all human. Now, Genesis chapter 9, it's the events after the ark, several things that will occur upon Noah and his family exiting the ark. In chapter 10 are genealogies. And I want to show that chapter 10 is not strictly that of chronological, that everything that occurs in chapter 10 happens before chapter 11, because it doesn't. That chapter 10, we'll just do this. Chapter 10 covers the generations before and after Babel. That these are the descendants and the lands they would inhabit. Eventually, they will get there. And there is a list of names in Genesis 10 that are extraordinary names, because these are the ancient names of countries. Very, very ancient names of countries, and this is where they came from. That this is not strictly chronological, once again, of everything that occurred in chapter 10 happens before chapter 11. It's more of a synopsis of these are the genealogies, and this is where the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth will end up. This is the countries that will begin. And we just look at verse 5 and we can see this. Genesis 10 verse 5, from these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families in their nations. Okay? Now, according to their languages, well, there were no languages prior to Genesis 11. There were none. They weren't separating until Genesis 11. They were pretty much compact together, just one family, and an ever-expanding family, that is for sure. But they would all be cousins and aunts and uncles of different stripes, because they are all related to each other. Now, Genesis 10:5 tells us that they're separated according to their language. That is giving us things that occurred after chapter 11. That this is where the nations came from. And here in one of these discussions concerning that of Babel was that of the question, was Noah Jewish? Which is funny. Just because someone's in the Bible doesn't mean they're Jewish. Because here we have one of his sons whose descendants are the Gentiles of the coastland. Okay, separated the coastland peoples of the Gentiles. Well, I chose the first one up, which was Japheth. And I because that proved my point right there. But Noah, you don't have a separation of Jew and Gentile until we get to Abraham, and it's not fully separate then. It's when we get to Sinai that there is a full separation between Gentile and Jew. Okay? And just because, and there's some other misconceptions about Noah, that somehow Noah had to have lived in the Palestine area. Could you show me where it says that? Because we're talking about the earth prior to the flood. I have no idea where he lived because it doesn't say where he lived. We don't know. All we know is where he landed, not where he built the ark. We don't have that. But Genesis 10, here, talking about his descendants. Now, we begin in Genesis 11, beginning in verse 1, and we'll just read our 9 scriptures. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Yeah, that's right. And naturally they would have. And it would be the language spoken prior to the flood. It would have been. Because they're just one family. That's all they are. Is just, were there other languages prior to the flood? It doesn't say that there were. It could have been one language all the way from creation. I'm not going to argue one way or the other. But I will say that it naturally would be the case because it's just one family. They're speaking the same language that Noah spoke. And Noah speaking the same language he's always spoken, and which was on the other side of the flood. So they have one speech. They just have one language. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So they land in the mountains of Ararat, which is in Turkey. We'll see a map in just a second. In the process of time, they have been traveling or migrating in a southeastern direction toward this plain of Shinar. And why are they traveling that direction? I don't know. They're finding a better place to live. Better places to live. Is it possible that as they are migrating that some aren't following? That some may decide, I'm quite happy here around this river or around this lake. This is where I'll stay. Yeah, it's very possible. But most of them continued on to the land of Shinar. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. They had the technology to do what they were about to do. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. We'll look at this more specifically in a second. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. So it's already under construction. And the city already exists. All right? And they continue to build on that city. How far had they gotten on the tower? I have no idea. I don't know how far they had gotten on it. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they purpose to do will be withheld from them. They're all together. You're looking at all the resources that the world, because that's pretty much the world the world population right there. I did account that there could be other scatterings, not very many, but there could be other scatterings of people that didn't follow all the way to Shinar. But this is where most of them are. And he sees the city, he sees the tower, and he says, this is what they're doing. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, and that they may not understand one another's speech. And so, in one point in time, just very, very quickly, it is a complete forgetting of the language they've all spoken and all heard all their life. Now, they speak something else. You can't have just these others that are introduced and without forgetting the first, because they would have the new languages and they would have the first. They would be bilingual. They'd still communicate in their first language. All that had to be done away with. They couldn't have that first language anymore. And when God confused the languages, He did a job. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. All right, let's just look at some things. One, this is 2 generations. This occurs 2 generations after the flood. We have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They are the 11th. And when I'm saying generations, Shem and Ham and Japheth are 11 generations from Adam. Adam is 1. They are 11. Noah is 10. Okay, once again, we can know from the genealogies given to us in Genesis. Cush is descendant from, he's a son of Ham. Nimrod then is, in fact, a grandson of Ham. And Nimrod is the one that is going to build Babel, because chapter 10 tells us he did. That's the beginnings of it. That he is, in fact, this mighty man, this man of renown. And it's possible. It's possible. If you've ever heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is an ancient poem, epic poem, very, very ancient. It's possible that Gilgamesh himself is based loosely off of Nimrod, because Gilgamesh is like this legendary, powerful man. And now I'm not saying that anything in Gilgamesh is actually everything to be taken seriously, but it seems like it is. Legends are usually based off of someone, and then they just amplify it. And it could be that Gilgamesh is Nimrod. Nevertheless, here's the earth. I left out the borders in this one. I'll put the borders in. But we've got what we're looking at is this. This is modern day Turkey. This would be Israel down here. This is Syria. This is Iraq, rather. Iran is on the other side of it. And we have Greece up in here. And this is our map. And the mountains of Ararat are in this area of Turkey. They're on the eastern side of Turkey. So the ark came to rest, Genesis 8 and verse 4, in that area. Exactly where? Don't know. Just the mountains of Ararat. And as we have stated before, I wouldn't go looking for the ark. And I don't need an ark to believe this anyway. I don't need an ark. Actually, an ark can be faked. But there's evidence around the world of Genesis chapter 6 and 7 that are far more powerful than some wooden object in the mountains of Ararat, or something loosely shaped like a boat in the mountains of Ararat. But it comes to rest there. And then by way of years, and it would be years, they end up in the plain of Shinar. That's Genesis 11 and 2, and it's in that area, the white circle there. And so it takes, how many years does it take? I don't know, 2 generations, and they get there. It takes a while. And so they have been drifting in this southeastern sort of direction. And so the first thing we want to look at in all this is the ability of man. Man is given certain abilities. And we have said it before, but we have a habit today of looking at people of the past and think they are the most ignorant, stupid people, to think that somehow, and I had a teenage boy years ago trying to tell me that from George Washington to himself, that he was a more evolved human being than George Washington. Based on what? Based on what? And actually, he wanted to go with height. And at the time, I didn't know it, but George Washington was taller than this guy. All right. So based on height, if it's based on height, then short people are not human. What? This is not getting very far. You don't have to raise your hand. But that would be his conclusion, this teenage boy's conclusion. People of the past, they had cleverness. They had the resources they were given. And with some folks, like with us, we're given a whole lot more resources than they were, because we're born centuries after them. We're, what was it? I think it was Einstein that said, they may be giants and we may be dwarves, but we stand on their shoulders and we see farther. And that's true. We're standing on the shoulders of so many generations before us. Okay? They're not standing on too many shoulders. But here we have the ability of man, and they are clever. They are able to do this, and they can work on this collectively. They can work on this as a large group of what are we going to do? And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. And look at what we see here. This is what they say. Let us build ourselves a city. That's the first thing they say. Is God against cities? Because that's the first thing they say. Let's build ourselves a city. Then they're going to say, let us build a tower. All right? But everybody wants to focus on the tower, that God didn't want towers being built, which is absurd. If God didn't want towers to be built, how do we have places like New York City? How do we have the whatever tower in Dubai? How do we have these things? The tallest building in the world used to be the Sears Tower, but we've gone a lot taller than that. All over the world, okay? But he wasn't against building towers any more than he was against building cities. But then they say, let us build a tower whose top is in the heavens. Meaning what? They don't say they want to go into heaven as though this was a stairway into heaven. They're not saying that. They want something impressive. They want something. Why do they want to build a city? Because they realize that people are beginning to move away. They want to keep everybody together. People are beginning to move away, or at least that is something that could happen. That they're going to begin to move to other places to live. And here you have those in Babel. And is Nimrod one of these? I would have to say he probably is one of these, because he did begin Babel. He did. Later, he's going to begin Nineveh, but that's after this. And one would wonder, you'd read chapter 10 and read that, and until you get to chapter 11, you don't know why he went somewhere else. If he began Babel, he would just stay in Babel. In chapter 11, you find out why he doesn't stay. Let us build a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, which implies that there were other places one could opt to go to. But most were staying there in the plain of Shinar. Let's make a name for ourselves, a place where everyone will want to stay, because we see the motive in this. The motive is lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. They wanted one big metropolis, is what they wanted. One big urban setting. Is there anything wrong with an urban setting or cities? No. So what's wrong with this? They don't want anyone leaving. They want to keep everyone there. Why? Well, I could understand why. I could understand why. You have more resources. The more people you have, the more resources you have. The more people to help in support, and more people that are there. You've got a lot more workers, a lot more talent, a lot more wealth that is produced. All that will be there. But there's also the ominous side to it, is if you're in control, and Nimrod would be, if he's king, he began it, someone who's in control of pretty much the world population, that's a bad idea. And God's not going to put up with that. And he doesn't want them just staying in one huge city. He wants them to scatter, just like we saw did happen in Genesis chapter 10. You have the coastland peoples, the Gentiles on the coast. They're scattered abroad and into their nations. There are nations that are going to be built with this scattering. But here, God acknowledges man's ability. He does acknowledge it. And he does acknowledge their plan will work. But the problem is it's going to get to something ugly. It's going to become ugly. And he is going to disperse them before it gets to that point. He's going to do it. And this is what he says. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they purpose to do will be withheld from them. He knows what they can do. And he knows that because they're able to work together so splendidly, they can do this. It reminds me of a short sermon I heard one time. And as a preacher, I cannot remember his name, but all I could think of was this preacher has no idea what he's talking about. Now, truly, he was giving encouragement that we should be as united as Babel was. And I'm not making that a joke. That sounds like one of my jokes. That is not a joke. He was preaching that we should be as united as Babel was. I don't think so. Because the implication is there, if you understood what you were saying, is that we're going to do what we want to do regardless of if it's right or wrong. We're just going to join in together and do what we want to do. Well, that is not God's way, and that's not how we want to be united. We want to be united under the will of God. But he says nothing's going to be withheld from them. This is what they're doing. But here is the thing. God is in control. This is not what God wanted for them. Not at all. He wanted them to fan out. Now, there for a little bit, being together is fine for the sake of gaining numbers, and because and this is archaeology that has been going on, and this is extremely ancient. There's an extremely ancient archaeological site that is believed to be the site of Babel. And it's very, very ancient. And they know at this site that it was an urban setting. They do know that. And they also know that there had to have been a lot of people there, not just because it was an urban setting, but that there were things that they can tell are being mass produced, such as bowls. You know, if you're on a farm you don't need that many bowls to where you would mass produce them. You would need bowls for the family, bowls for other reasons in cooking or whatever, and then that's all you would need. You wouldn't need any more. But in a city where the population keeps growing and growing, you will need bowls. And that's when you can have professional potters of where they are making bowls professionally and mass producing them. And they know this because they're made out of molds and they're all identical, absolutely identical, except for handprints left from the raw clay. That they are, which is an extraordinary thing of getting someone's fingerprints from the ancient world. That is extraordinary to me. And they also know that this particular site, something occurred and nobody was there anymore for hundreds of years. They do know that too. Something big was there and all of a sudden it's not there anymore. All right? God is in control. He's in control. Just because they decide they're going to do this doesn't mean He wants them to do it, and doesn't mean that they're just going to be able to overpower Him and do what they want to do. He is in control, absolutely in control. And He says, "Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." And it is believed by some, and I'm one of those that believes it, that there are some languages around today, while they have altered through time, that came out of Babel. Chinese is one of those languages. I think there is good evidence that it is, very good evidence that it is. And but these are languages coming out of Babel, and from there you have language groups. Now we could go back to Genesis chapter 10, I think it was verse 5, where it says they were divided in their languages and in their families, which means that God did not separate immediate families. When you have husband, wife, children, He's not going to separate them by language. He's not going to break up homes by language. Now, they are one big extended family. He's going to have to bust that up. But He's not going to bust up marriages. He's not going to bust up siblings. By this, that they're going to be separated by families, by languages that have been given to those families. And now they all speak a different language. It's like they woke up one morning, things are absolutely normal, and I just wonder if they realized that they're speaking a different language now until they meet someone who is speaking gibberish. Because I wonder if suddenly they realize, I've never said that word before. I've never said any of these words before, and how is it? I'm not sure that came into their mind. Maybe it did, I don't know. But everyone, or I say everyone, but you have large groups in here that they can't speak anymore. Well, how are you going to keep that group together? You can't. You can't keep it together. They made a name for themselves, all right. We got it today, Babel. They made a name for themselves, but not what they thought was going to happen. They had no idea. And here comes our next point, is God closes a door, and there is no going back. There is no going back to Babel. You can't do it. There is no, that door has been permanently shut, and it's basically a new world for them. And they can't stay there. They now have to leave. And through, I don't know how many generations we would be talking, or how many centuries we would be talking, but just moving away and away and away till we have people that are on islands in the middle of the Pacific, and people on different continents, people that have found places like New Zealand and the Tierra del Fuego. These are in New Zealand, that they have found these places just by way of migrating and migrating and moving and moving. God closed a door. He had already closed a big door. That is of the flood. That changed the world completely. And there is no going back to that. And when it comes to this point, God closed another door. It wasn't as harsh because nobody died in the process of this. But he closes this door and there's no going back. You can't just decide, let's see if we can't figure out what they're saying. It would be impossible. It'd be impossible for them to try it. Now today, we've had a whole lot of years of having different languages. Today we have helps. Back then, they had no help whatsoever. But we see this, so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. They were building this city. And the emphasis here is not so much the tower, because God wasn't against a tower. You know why I know that? Not only do we have towers today, but these ancient people, they went to... You find ziggurats, we could call it a tower, ziggurats in ancient ones in Iraq, but we find them all over the world. Even North America, we have ziggurats here. South America, Central America, Asia, everywhere there are ziggurats. And it is as though people remembered what was either accomplished or they wanted to accomplish. They remembered that and they wanted to duplicate it wherever they went. God wasn't against them building a tower. He was against them staying in one place and not fanning out. But here it is, and this is something we need to understand. The world is changed again by God. God has changed this world numerous times. There are different ages. Different ages. There was the Greek Empire. There's no returning back to it. That age is done. There was the Babylonian Empire. That age is done. There was the age of what we call the Victorian age. That's done. It's like with World War I, the door was slammed on that one. The remnants are gone from that. God changes the world. And we can just go ahead and expect that as men do what they want to do, God will be changing the world, and that things will never, ever stay. You know, it would be really bad to still be under serfdom. You know, that'd be really, medieval Europe. It'd be really bad if we all were just tribes and warring tribes. That'd be miserable if that's all the history of the earth was. Things change. And God can use languages to change it. God can also use plagues to change it. And the bubonic plague changed the world. There are all kinds of things that God can just close a door and that's it. You just got to move forward. God can permit or prevent anything purposed by man. Anything. If He wants it to happen, it can happen. If He allows it to happen, it can happen. But if He doesn't want it happening, then it's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen for very long. He's going to shut it down. He will shut it down. And it all comes back to God is completely in control. God changes the conditions of the world many times over, and He's done it. He did it with a flood. He did it at Babel. He did it with the Babylonian Empire and all these other empires. He did quite a bit. And all of this are lessons to be learned from Babel. Expect God's hand on the world, because He's not some watchmaker who wound everything up and just walks away. God rules in the kingdom of men. We have that in the book of Daniel. Christ rules the nations with the rod of iron. We have that in multiple places. Psalm 2 is just one place. But we can also see that being repeated throughout the New Testament, going all the way to Revelation. God has His hand in the events of the world. God is in control. Whether something seems right or not doesn't matter. If God doesn't want it to happen, He has His reasons for it. And if something is just absolutely wicked, well, that wicked thing may happen. And it will happen for a season, and then God is going to shut it down. And what I mean by a season, it may be years, it may be decades, but God will shut it down. He will shut it down, and that will be the end of it. The world has seen many things rise and fall, and many problems that have come about. But through it all, God controls it. God is the one, as we have described on various occasions. God is like the man that controls the hydroelectric dam. He can let a little water go down into the creek, or he can flood the valley. He can do what he wants to do. He can shut off the water. There's no more water, if that's what he wants to do. He's in complete control. And God is still in control today. No man, however powerful, however arrogant, no man is in control. And most certainly, Satan is not in control. It is God. This is not a lesson that is evangelistic, but it's a lesson to encourage us. It's a lesson to help us along in understanding our past, understanding that of our present, and understanding how God works in this world. And He can work in ways beyond predicting, in ways that you can never, ever guess His next move. You can't, other than to know He will win. How's He going to win? I don't know, but He will. I don't know how He's going to do it, but He has the resources to do it. He can do it in an instant if He wants to. This morning we need to examine ourselves, where we stand spiritually, where we are in our relationship with God, who created us all. This morning, we need to understand that we're going to be standing before the judge of all. Judges will be judged by Him. Emperors will be judged by Him. Those who were so powerful in their day, no one would stand in judgment over them, but God will be. Specifically, Christ will be. And let us not lie to ourselves and think that somehow God makes excuses for us, or God will make allowances for us when He wouldn't for anybody else. Because God is no respecter of persons, and He's going to do exactly what He said He would do. And He will judge all, and He will judge it by righteousness. He would judge it by these books. This morning, if you need to respond to the invitation, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.